IVM.
I am bloodthirsty. I am a bloodthirsty goddess Kali who lives and moves in the cremation grounds. I am thirsty because I want blood. Thank God I pull it off with a straight face and it would have sounded so much better in Hindi. मैं खून की प्यासी हूँ. Okay, that's so not me. It's Shaila Bala Devi. Though what I am definitely pyasi for is a glass of water or maybe ruafza because it's so hot in Delhi. Oof. Anyway, let's get started with the show. My name is Priya Mirza, and you're with me on The Longest Constitution, a podcast on the Constitution of India and constitutional politics. In today's show, we are carrying on with our dedicated pursuit of tracking the freedom of expression as well as the collective fate of a small tribe of people who live in Niyamgiri, Orissa, the Dongria Cones, whose existence and home was threatened by this mining company Vedanta. And we'll also examine constitutional provisions about the president of this country. Okay, so let's resume with our bloody story about Shaila Bala Devi, who owned this Bharati press in Purulia, Bihar, and the year is 1949. And this press published a pamphlet in Bangla called Sangram, which openly called for revolution and murder through that "मैं खून की प्यासी हूँ" wala dialogue, which makes Dracula sound like a pretty relaxed person since he just went about quietly drinking people's blood without specifically encouraging other people to do so. Nice count, nice. But on a serious note, can one incite people to commit murder? Is that constitutional? So I'm thinking of social media these days, of course, Twitter, etc. But back then, the government of Bihar took serious action and asked her to deposit rupees 2,000. And that was a lot of money back then. Because under the Indian Press Act, if the press was being used to incite or encourage murder or violence, this monetary deposit was a way to dissuade publishers from publishing such stuff. But did Shaila Bala Devi accept that? No. Off she marched to the Patna High Court to challenge this. You go, girl, for blood, justice, whatever works for you. Now, it's okay if you're urban and urbane and can access courts. And therefore, I think justice and the tools of justice, the accessibility, varies on who and where you are. And therefore, the expression moving court. To petition court, you have to move because the court ain't coming to you. And interestingly, that also puts some light on how unevenly the light of the glorious constitution falls on people and, more importantly, groups of people. So either one moves court oneself, and if one cannot do that, others do it for you. Well-meaning, public-spirited people, presumably. And that's what PIL is essentially about, public interest litigation. And we will be looking into the history of the ingenious PIL, but now is not the time. Instead, it is time to look at the office of the President of India. I hope you remember the last episode where we looked at how the third President of India, Zakir Husain's candidature was challenged by Babu Rao Patel because of an oath he did not take. And the court in charge of looking into these presidential electoral disputes is the Supreme Court, going by Article 71. So, challenges to the elections of our Rashtrapati are decided by the Supreme Court, not the Election Commission. Just a second, Rashtrapati, really? The Pati of our Rashtra? But these Patis are only Patis, unlike the regular Patis, for 5 years. That's the term of the President of India. Anyway, now when this post was being debated in the Constituent Assembly, there was a lot of debate about how. How should this person be elected? And it was eventually decided that the president should be indirectly elected by an electoral college. Now, hear this out, comprising of A, the elected members of both houses of parliament, and B, the elected members of the legislative assemblies of states. Our story, though, is to do with one Dr. Khare, and the year is 1957. And when the presidential elections took place that year, a few seats of this electoral college were vacant. So Khare filed a petition challenging the election of Rajendra Prasad, the only person, by the way, to be the president of India twice. And the question was, if certain seats of the electoral college which elects the president are vacant, can the election of the president of India be held void? And with that, we go to the PILs filed against the billion-dollar corporation Vedanta, which had plans of happily mining and destroying not just a people, but their culture, a language, a way of life, as well as clean, sparkling streams and a gorgeous mountain and scores of animals and birds. Now, we remember PISA 1996, which asserted the role of the scheduled tribes' consent in any question which affected their lands. Compounded with the Forest Dwellers Act 2006, which for the first time recognized the historical rights of the tribals over their forests, as well as collective pressure by Indian NGOs, international NGOs. In 2010, a committee set up by the Ministry of Environment and Forests was asked to look into the matter. And this is what the NC Saxena committee found, that Vedanta had lied when it said that no forests would be enclosed by the refinery, that the process of securing the consent of the people of Niyamgiri had not been followed, that the six-fold expansion of the refinery was illegal, that the government of Orissa had been extraordinarily ineffective and corrupt. And most importantly, in the few public hearings held in these years, the opposition to the project was overwhelming. A familiar and depressing story. The committee held Vedanta in violation of the law. And following that, for the first time in the history of this glorious nation, in 2013, the Supreme Court directed that the Gram Sabha had to approve of any mining or refinery in the area. And that's how India's first environment referendum took place. What's a referendum? So it's a kind of a vote in which all the people in an area are asked to give their opinion about or decide an important political or social question. And definitely not about what Kim Kardashian wore to the Met Gala this year. And was it better or worse than what she wore last year? No, not that sort of a question. Just clarifying. And of course, this referendum was a tense moment. And every effort was made to silence the voices of the Dongria Koans. So, for example, although over 150 villages were affected, only 12 were allowed to take part in the referendum. And amidst tight security, bribery, intimidation, misinformation, violence, and corruption, the Dongria Koans finally spoke directly to the state and said, no, consent matters. So let's start to wrap things up. In the Shaila Bala Devi case, that's Bharati Press versus Chief Secretary 1951, the court held that a section of the Press Act was unconstitutional. But also hear this out. The judge also upheld that to incite murder was a part of the fundamental right to speech and expression. Scary. And that's one extreme interpretation of Article 19. Meanwhile, in N.B. Khare versus Election Commission of India, 1957, the court declined the petition, but soon after, Parliament amended Article 71 to the effect that on grounds of vacancies in the Electoral College, the president's election could not be challenged. And in January 2014, the Ministry of Environment and Forests, which had earlier aided Vedanta's invasion of Niyamgiri, completely rejected the project. So today's takeaways are: first, the limits and extents of free speech were hotly debated in the first year of India's independence and are linked to our first constitutional amendment. That's on the next episode. Second, that it took collective action to challenge the might of the state in the Niyamgiri conflict. But that's also just one of the scores of land conflicts which go unnoticed and forgotten. Finally, in the election of the President of India, there is no minimum floor requirement. Even if all the legislative assemblies are dissolved and there's just one, the election of the President of India would still be valid. Interesting and frightening. I hope you like this show. If you have questions or comments, please send them in on Twitter, where I tweet at FundamentallyP, or on Instagram, The Longest Constitution. Until next time, this is me, Priya Mirza, signing out.
There's a quick survey to fill out on ivmpodcast.com/survey. It lets us know a little bit more about who's listening to us. And you know what? We're going to do a few prizes. So, we'll do a random drawing of maybe 10 people and we'll send you all some swag. Remember, that's ivmpodcast.com/survey where you can fill out the survey. Hello. It's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On Think Fast, Varun and Sujit discussed the Twitter sting operation and Jack Ma pulling out of Paytm. On Capgemini's Techipedia series, Shailaditya speaks to Anand Chandramouli and Deepak Solanki about sustainable harvesting practices through digital farming. On The Wire Talks, Siddharth talks to author and translator Navdeep Suri about the partition and the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. On Marathi Khidkitun, the Deshmukhs explore how animals and birds gauge their sense of distance in the environment. And on Big Talk About Tiny Humans, Devi Shobha and Meghna explain the right way to talk to children about sex and sexuality. We've got some exciting news for you. IVM Podcast has launched merchandise and our first line is out now. Head to the IVM Podcast website and click on the shop tab and check out the first collection of t-shirts. Do follow us on social media as well. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of our other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. Also, don't forget to rate us on any of the platforms you're listening to us on, whether it's Spotify, whether it's Apple, wherever you do that, that is really helpful for us. And do remember, you can also check a lot of our shows out on YouTube. If you go to ivmpodcast.com/YouTube, you get a list of all of our channels. We're also doing a small listener survey, so please do help us out with that. If you go to ivmpodcast.com/survey, it'll help us understand a little bit more about our listeners. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors this week, SBI Life Insurance, Jupiter, a digital banking app, and Capgemini. Get the future you want. Thank you so much. Without you guys, this wouldn't be possible.